Hey, this is G here from the G and Cleland Show, and today is our first episode of a new segment called Based on a True Story, where we bring you interesting and amazing and inspiring stories of people's actual lives. So the first one we have is from a guy named Daniel Cleland, and he named his story From the Matrix to Ayahuasca. So I just want you guys to sit back, relax, and enjoy the podcast. Hey, it's Giovanni here from Collective Evolution, G and Cleland Show. We have a very special guest today. I don't know where I should say he's from, because he's from a little bit all over the place, but he's from Pulse Tours, currently residing in South America.
That's one of my areas.
One of your areas. Very interesting guy who's going to share his story today on this new episode called Based on a True Story. So Dan, let's start right from the beginning. Thanks for coming on the show. Tell me a little bit about your childhood, and then just take us through why we found your story so interesting.
All right. Well, not too much of interest in the childhood. I grew up in a small town about 2 hours north of here in Toronto. The town's called Walkerton, Ontario. Small rural community. Had a pretty good family. I mean, of course, a few childhood kind of issues which may have carried over into adulthood, but nothing too severe. Did high school in Walkerton till I was 18. Didn't really see much of a city until I went to college in London, Ontario when I was 18.
Okay.
So nothing too crazy, nothing too out of the ordinary there.
All right, cool. And so from there, I guess you went to college or sort of groomed for the corporate lifestyle. Tell us about that and how that sort of led into the next few years of your life.
Yeah, so like any high school kid, you're kind of, you've got this advice coming from the top, from parents, from teachers, from guidance counselors. In your last year of school, you get this college calendar or brochure, so you're kind of flipping through these pages of the college brochure, wondering, what am I going to do with my life?
Mm-hmm.
How are you supposed to decide that when you're 18 years old? Looking through a book, you really have no idea what's out there in the world. You have no idea how it would actually look getting into any of these jobs that you're potentially embarking on a 4 or 7 year study program to go into doing. So at the time, my father was working at the nuclear power station in Tiverton, and he was in technology, and I knew that was kind of, at that time, I wanted to do something that appeased my superiors, my parents, and so I signed up for a computer programming course in college, which
sounds like it gives you a lot of options. Computer programming. Computers are always a good thing, I guess, right?
Yeah. Now that was back in 2000, and so the scene is a lot different now. But I ended up going into that program. I did it for about a year and didn't really quite jive with it so much. So I switched over to electrical engineering technician. Did that for a year. Didn't quite jive with it so much. Did electronics. Wasn't too into the bench work, So the fourth year of college, I pretty much just assembled a few courses from all those and just got out with a certificate that I don't even think I collected. It was just
Piece of paper for on the wall somewhere.
I just had to get out,
Yeah.
and get out into the world. And
I think it's a very common story for a lot of people that are just going to college because they feel they have to go and
Absolutely.
taking courses that they think they're going to use someday. And how much of your college schooling do you think you've actually put into practice since you've come out of there?
Well, the technical skills I learned, not very much at all. But I did, some of the theory, some of the electrical theory and technology. I have, leveraged some of that.
Okay,
coming up.
Good. So some value there. That's good.
And potentially some more. I'm getting I'm leaning towards some more technological projects right now. But
okay, we'll come back around to that.
Sure.
So tell me after that. So what happens? You got a job. You're ready for the workforce.
So I remember one of my teachers in my electrical course told me one day, he said, "You're so full of shit, you should not be a technician, you should be a sales guy." And I actually, coincidentally, I applied for a air quality technician job coming out of college, but it was actually, once I got there and checked it out, it was actually a sales job. And I did okay, I did all right. It was kind of easy to make a good paycheck, talking to people, communicating, sharing ideas. And so I ended up getting into sales at the residential level, which then morphed into the business to business, small business level, which then eventually got into like the industrial level. So I thought I had a pretty good thing going. You know, I got a car, you know, car payments using some of my technical knowledge. It was
It's one of the benchmarks for success as you're growing. It's like getting your own car and having a car payment, right?
It is, right? It is.
I guess was it long lasting, that sort of feeling of success, or was it more like, okay, now I got a payment to make, or when you got that car the first time? Do you remember your first car?
Oh yeah. It was a Kia Spectra 2005. I was pretty stoked about it. Yeah, and I continued on that kind of path, growing with the company, and there was just like something that was kind of intrinsically lacking in that. You know, like I found myself in the program, so to speak. I was working, I had my payments, I was paying rent, and I was kind of doing the 9 to 5 grind. And I couldn't help but thinking, like, is this all there is? Like, do I just do this until I make enough money to buy a house, and then buy a house, and then, you know, get married and have kids and settle down? It's like, it just wasn't enough. And then I had a real issue with the 2-day weekends and like the 1 or 2 weeks a year of vacation. It was just kind of...
What did that feel like? Like, how can you describe the feeling of that? Is there any way? Because I know a lot of people feeling that.
Frustration.
Yeah.
You know, frustration, and just like, what is it? You just kind of question it. Like, is this right? You know, like what, like it just, you kind of lose that enthusiasm for life. You know, just waking up Monday mornings. You know, like you hate the morning. You want to stay in bed, but you can't.
You can turn the dial 20 years and be that same Monday morning waking up. She can be a little bit more grayer, a little more balder in my case, and then,
more responsibilities.
You know, just 20 years went by, and you look back like, what happened? You know, just filled that same routine.
Exactly.
So how does one sort of go from that and make a change? I think that's what a lot of people like. What happened in your case?
I started traveling.
You just picked up one day and took some time off work and...
Well, you know, it was actually, it was a long time coming. You know, I kind of was just craving like a sense of adventure and challenge and just like breaking out of routine, you know, novelty. And so back in 2006, I decided it's time to make a trip. And I had this pull towards Brazil. I don't know why, whether it was the beaches, the jungles, the hot ladies,
something
the good music.
Brazil,
it's just that like gritty, like, oh, Brazil, you know? Yeah. It just had everything I was looking for in an adventure. So I planned a trip for myself independently, a 6-week journey. It was over Christmas and New Year's, 2006, 2007. And, you know, I actually, in the planning process, I really discovered that like I loved the actual like the lead up to the journey. It was researching, like planning, where am I going to go, looking at the different hostels and hotels and events and learning a bit of the new language and just dreaming and anticipating. And then I went on this 6-week trip, and it was like just everything I could have asked for and more. Yeah.
So Brazil seems like a scary place to most people. There's a lot of bad press. Is it when you went, was there any fear going to an unknown place, or were you more of the adventure, like take it as it goes?
No, it was still a bit dodgy, like at night, you know, and there were still places you wanted to avoid. I saw like in Rio, I saw a dead guy laying on the middle of the street one day. And then, you know, like later on, as I was traveling there in the subsequent years, you know, I've heard gunshots go off in a crowd of people, and you know, I was traveling with some people who got robbed with a, you know, knife point and stuff like that. So back then it was dangerous to an extent. I think now the crime rate's a little bit higher because the economy's so. I wouldn't necessarily recommend traveling to Brazil.
There are places people can go to break free that's still adventurous and not so dangerous.
Oh yeah, there's lots. Lots. South America is a great place. You know, maybe Colombia is a better place to go now than Brazil. Certainly not Venezuela. Peru's good. You know,
cool.
Ecuador.
Okay, so you have this 6-week incredible journey, and then.
So then I get back to Canada, back to my old job. I was living in Calgary, and it was the middle of January. So I come from this like beautiful, balmy, beachy paradise in Brazil. And I was like, my days were like running down Copacabana Beach, my board shorts, and like they had these little workout areas along the beach, so you could run a couple 100 meters and then do your like bar dips and your push-ups and your sit-ups and then keep running. It was awesome. And the parties and everything. I was actually working as a bartender at this rooftop hostel bar, like making caipirinhas, and it was just awesome. And then I get back to Calgary in January, and I don't know if you've ever been to Calgary in January. It's cold. Yeah. They put block heaters up, outlets in the parking stalls so you can plug your car in so it doesn't freeze. So as soon as I got back, and going back to my old job, I was even more convinced that I needed to do something different. I was not cut out for the standard, just routine 9-to-5 grind program. A lot of times you're just making enough to like pay the bills and barely break out of the program, like barely get ahead. A lot of people are struggling to make enough money. So within a couple months, I just started applying for jobs with tour companies that were traveling to Brazil. And I kind of lied on my resume a little. Let's say embellished my ability to speak Portuguese and Spanish, because that was a prerequisite, of course, for getting a tour leading job in South America. But I ended up getting through the interview process, and within a couple months, I was down in Guatemala training to become a tour leader for G Adventures, which is a company based here in Toronto. Really awesome company. So my training, we went through Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, and then they passed me in the first round. I ended up doing a shadow trip in Costa Rica with another trainer, and then I was a tour leader. So the next year and a half of my life was me living out of a backpack, guiding groups of 15 people through Costa Rica, Panama, Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina.
Saving any money, making any money? Or
yeah, actually, the company, inherently that job doesn't cost a lot of money because the company's paying for your hotels, you get a food allowance, you get a salary, fortunately, the participants, the passengers on the trips, were oftentimes generous with tips. So
nice. Okay.
I ended up traveling for a year and a half through all these different places I wanted to see, and by the end of it, I saved a few $1,000s. Right. So
yeah, it's interesting to see what the change is from that normal 9 to 5. Now you're doing tour guide. Can you make that? Can you support yourself? And I guess you can. A lot of people that fear, if I don't do this, I'm not going to make it doing something I like.
Yeah.
So what happened after that? You found yourself traveling to Australia, I think you mentioned?
Well, so basically, traveling all of these paradisical places around South America and Central America, I discovered even in the most remote places, there were still issues with garbage and social inequality and all this kind of stuff. So I wanted to do something a little more valuable to the world to help rectify some of these issues. So I went back to Canada and started studying. I studied environmental studies, sociology, these different types of things. And after a year of studies, I found myself on a field trip to Australia to do a conservation study and then continue my studies there in environmental sciences. Things got off track while I was there. It was right after the financial crisis, so it was very difficult to find high-paying work, especially with the type of traveling visa I had. So I ended up deferring my studies 3 times while I was there because I couldn't pay for it. And in the meantime, I was working door-to-door sales with really kind of desperate cash-only, commission-only kind of jobs that travelers would get to help supplement their travel costs, but not really save up to actually go to school. So that led to a bit of a period of confusion and depression and desperation, which culminated with one Friday night I was out and at the nightclubs and came back home a little bit early, feeling a little bit restless. I went down to South Bank. It's a park on the Brisbane River, and there's this 20-meter cliff called Kangaroo Point. So I'd often see people like climbing up it with ropes and harnesses and helmets and spotters and all that stuff. And I was down there by myself, and I decided to give it a try. So
without any ropes or harnesses?
No ropes, no harnesses, free climb in the middle of the night, wearing dress shoes, and I got almost to the top. Like, I wasn't actually planning to go all the way up, but it was going smooth at the beginning. So I tried to go all the way up, got about 2 meters from the top, and hit a kind of like a point of an impassable overhang that I couldn't get around. And I tried climbing down, but
this is in the dark.
This is in the dark, yeah. So going up was a little bit easier than trying to go back down, like with these pointy-toed dress shoes was challenging. It was impossible, and so I kind of started to panic, and there was only one way to go, is either like try to jump to this one lip that I thought I could maybe get my hands around, or like, I don't know, sit up there and tremble until I hit the ground. So I jumped and I fell, and like shattered my femur and my pelvis. It was pretty rough, like compound fracture. I've got a big scar right here where the bone came out, and so
someone found you there?
Yeah. So luckily there were some people down there. Otherwise, I probably would have bled to death. But so there were some folks down in the park, maybe I think Friday night, having a couple beers or something. Some teenagers. They came over. The first thing the guy says is like, "Holy shit, man! Look at your leg." I'm like, "I know. You want to call me an ambulance?" And so they did. Then I ended up spending a month in the hospital, in the trauma ward. So like exoskeleton for the first week or so. Then they did a big surgery, put titanium all in my leg and pelvis, and during that time, you know, I had a lot of downtime, time to think, and I was already familiar with ayahuasca because I'd read about it in Daniel Pinchbeck's 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. Plus, I was following Reality Sandwich at that point, and I thought that maybe ayahuasca could help kind of get me out of that rut.
You were taking painkillers also?
I was taking so many opiates, it was crazy. Like, it was almost like a dual purpose, because I needed the opiates for my pain because my whole body was shattered and cut up. But for me, it doubled as like, it was also pushing out my kind of depression and my dissatisfaction with my life circumstances at that point. So that kind of was a bit of a band-aid on a bullet wound, but it didn't help for long before it actually started making the problems worse. So, I mean, yeah, I had all this stuff going on. I kind of like, at one point I wrote in my journal that it felt like there were little balls of garbage just orbiting around my head, like negative thought programs or whatever. Just things that were like sabotaging my life. So, so yeah, I mean, I was aware of ayahuasca. I was afraid of ayahuasca. Back then, it was 6 years ago. And it was even like further beyond the mainstream awareness, you know? And when people talked about it, it was like this super intense, psychedelic, you confronted all your demons, and you know, I was afraid of what demons I had inside me. So, anyways, I decided that like I needed to do something. I needed that out. You know, I needed to try something. Otherwise, I was borderline suicidal. And so I decided, I mean, it took me a couple months to heal in Australia. I was on crutches for a while, and then I decided to quit Australia and go back to Canada. And on the way back, I went to Peru to find ayahuasca. So long story short, ayahuasca, even on my first ceremony, like I was lucky. Not everyone gets a huge hit in their first ceremony, but yeah, it just like went very deep on me. I purged like everything that was just
in there. Yeah.
It just unlocked the floodgates, and just, I let everything out. I just came to terms with a lot of my own self-contempt. Like I thought, I felt like at that moment everything was perfect in space and time, and the only way I could have gotten there was if all these other mistakes I'd made which were perceived mistakes, had led me to that point.
Like climbing a cliff face and dress shoes in the middle of the night by yourself, It sounds almost crazy. Like, it sounds almost like, how could you possibly have even thought of that? But from a bigger picture, it was like, that's exactly what you needed to get you where you are today.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, like, I could have looked at that trip to Australia as a huge mistake, or looked at it as the turning point in
Where would you have been if you didn't go there? Who knows, right?
I probably would have continued my studies in Canada, finished the bachelor's degree, and then who knows where I would have gone. It turns out that actually that 3 years of life experience that I got in Australia, and plus the 2 years after that in different international scenarios, actually allowed me to get acceptance into a master's program, which I completed. So I kind of bypassed the bachelor's degree and just went straight to the master's by utilizing that life experience. So nice. I'm in the same place I would have been if I would have completed that bachelor's degree in time, but in space, probably not.
Yeah. So you have this crazy ayahuasca experience, life altering, I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Shifts you in ways you couldn't even imagine.
Yeah. So
and then you have this, what happens after that?
So basically the first thing that happened was I wrote a very explicitly detailed account of my experience, and I sent it to every contact in my Hotmail contacts list. And that included like family members, like teachers, like whatever. Anybody who's ever known me got that letter.
What was the response like?
Fear. Like, especially for most of my family members just thought I'd gone off the deep end, like I was, down in the jungle doing drugs and like, had completely fallen off the wagon. My parents were concerned that what I was drinking was like poison or something like that. So I did get a little bit of negative backlash from that, but the point was very simple for me. It was, this is a very special medicine, and I think this can revolutionize people's lives like nothing else. And so it was my job to just get the awareness out there, and I wasn't afraid of being a little bit controversial, So I started talking about it a lot. Everyone in my network knew what I was getting into. I started posting research on my social media and stuff. And I started moving toward that path of ayahuasca. So within about 6 months after my first ceremony, I had accepted a volunteer writing job at a center in Peru for a month. So I did a month-long diet there, wrote about it on a blog, and it just helped deepen my understanding of the medicine and helped me promote it more and kind of get into writing about my experience and stuff like that. And in that month, I started getting ideas of how I could build a facility. Wasn't necessarily supposed to be just an ayahuasca center, more of like an intercultural integration center with ceremonies and kind of touristic activities and a little bit of education as well. But that ultimately was the formation of the Ayahuasca Adventure Center, which is the retreat center we now run down in Peru. So it just kind of cleared out my thinking, and I had all these different experiences, a little bit of technical, a little bit of business and sales, a little bit of tourism, and it just allowed me to bring all that together. And instead of picking one pigeonholed job, it was like, oh, I can like take all my skills and do something that I'm passionate about and that helps other people, and and break out of the program. So
people who are stuck in the program now, how do you think they can find out? Because I think a lot of people are not sure. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I can do. How can people sort of use some of your story? You think an ayahuasca trip, just getting out and going to the jungle for a month, can help people to sort of refocus their life and see what do you think? Like, how can people sort of, what do you think people can do that are feeling how you felt before you sort of, do they have to go to Australia and break their hip? Something
No.
crazy like that?
No.
Is that something?
It depends what's holding them back.
Yeah.
Is it something personal? Is it something like energetic? Is it related to trauma from the past? Or are you trapped in bad relationships or cultural programming? Then, ayahuasca can help you break out of that, help kind of, I liken it to, if you're a car and you're driving along and you've got a whole bunch of stuff like stuck to the vehicle, you're catching air, it's slowing you down, you're not really driving in a efficient manner. So ayahuasca can kind of help knock that stuff off.
Clear that up for you.
So you're like a bullet, but then there's also the cultural side of things. So if you're kind of stuck in the same place, same routine, following the footsteps of your forefathers who, really, our generations above us, they didn't really have the opportunity to kind of get out and see the world and have all the access to the world at their fingertips. So travel is a way that you can break out of your nation state culture, right? So you can kind of get out there and see the world, and even if you're not making a lot of money, that experience is invaluable. And when you're out there in the world traveling, you get all kinds of ideas. You have that time away from your culture to like really dive into alternative thinking. So that's one way to do it. And then more on the pragmatic side of things, there's billions of ways you can become an entrepreneur these days. You can start little companies for next to nothing. You can get out there, you can do things on the internet, you can find ways to make passive income. There are ways pragmatically to earn a living doing things other than the standard pigeonhole job that you get by searching on the Human Resources Department of Canada job website or like wherever, So there are options.
Yeah. So you went on to write a book. You want to tell us a little about that? The book you wrote about some of your experiences. Tell us about that.
Absolutely.
We only have a couple minutes left, but tell us about your book and what you're doing now.
So I wrote a book. It's called Pulse of the Jungle, and it's really using my story the last 10 years as the backbone, as an inspirational guide for seekers wishing to transcend culture, explore the world, and make an impact. It is also themed on ayahuasca, but instead of getting into the science, history, or ideology of ayahuasca, we basically use personal stories from 7 other people besides myself who have had major life changes as a result of ayahuasca. And it's not like, here was my psychedelic trip and in every detail. It's like, here's what I did over the course of a couple years while working with the medicine, how the medicine helped change my life. And there are some psychedelic trip accounts. Michael Sanders.
He's been on the podcast, yeah.
Michael Sanders, he's a well-known friend of Collective Evolution. He's one of the contributors. Guy Crittenden, another local guy in the spiritual community here who's an environmental journalist. So really, the motivation behind the book is to give people an inspiration, and I also provide some of the tools and resources and mentors that I've used along the way to help give me the skills I needed to become effective in the world of entrepreneurship.
Awesome. And if people want to get your book, how can they get it?
I'm running a pre-sales campaign right now for the rest of October. It's at pulseofthejungle.com. And the pre-sales come with all kinds of cool perks and stuff like that, discounts for ayahuasca retreat in Peru.
One for sure.
Cool. And the book is scheduled to be published first week of December, so it's coming out real soon.
All right, guys, please support Dan and his book. I'm sure it's going to be awesome. He's an awesome guy doing great things in the world, and I'm sure we're going to have him back to hear about some of the other cool things he's working on now. Thanks a lot, Dan. Really appreciate having you on here.
Thanks, Gio. Thanks, everybody.